Alright guys, and welcome to my beginner's guide to Oblivion. Now I mainly wanted to make this video for people who have played Skyrim and I want to give Oblivion a little bit of a spin, but there's a few things that are a little bit confusing and a few words that don't really make sense. This video is also going to be very useful for veterans of Oblivion because I'm going to explain all of the very subtle background changes that the game has experienced. So, for instance, what the hell are attributes? What are all these weird skills that were in Skyrim, like athletics, and how on earth does alchemy work in this game? We will cover everything. We will explain what all the attributes mean and what they do. We will explain the skills that are not in Skyrim. We'll also talk about how leveling works, because it's actually different, very different from Skyrim, but also now actually very different from the original Oblivion. The combat has changed a lot, actually. What's the difference between blunt and swords? What's the difference between heavy and light armor? We will also talk about the disposition stat in Oblivion. It's a mechanic that you really can't avoid in Oblivion. It influences persuasion, quests, mercantile, haggling, fame, and infamy. It's very important to know. We'll fully explain alchemy, spell making, and enchanting. And lastly, we'll talk about how sneaking works in the game. So, first of all, strength. It has actually changed from the original Oblivion. It now only increases the damage with longswords, claymores, maces, war axes, battle axes, warhammers, and your bare hands. It used to increase the damage of all weapons, but not anymore. We'll talk about that later. And each point of strength also increases your encumbrance by 5 points, and it now increases your maximum health, and this is a new thing. But it will not increase your health as much as the endurance stat does. Intelligence, it just increases your maximum magicka, and that's it. It's not changed. Willpower is slightly different. It still increases your magicka regen rate and your maximum fatigue. The magicka regen is purely based on your willpower stat now. It's not based on your total mana in its equation. And each point gives you 2.7 fatigue points instead of just 1 fatigue point now. So yeah, willpower does now give you more fatigue than it used to. Agility, this increases your damage with daggers, short swords, and bows. It just used to be bows, but now it's also all of the kind of roguey flavoured weapons. And it now increases your fatigue regeneration rate. It no longer reduces the chance of you being staggered anymore. The stagger thing has kind of been reworked. We'll talk about that in the combat section. Speed, very simple, just makes you faster, pretty self-explanatory. Now endurance, it increases your max health, and it's now retrospective, so it doesn't increase the amount of health you gain per level. You don't need to try and maximize your endurance, low level and early game anymore. And it also improves your health regeneration rate, which is totally new. Now personality is one of the more weaker stats, to be honest, unless you're like role-playing a bard. So for every 4 points you have in personality, your disposition to all NPCs is increased by 1 point. It also means enemies are more likely to not be hostile to you or accept to yield. When you yield, it's basically is when you stop combat. Now, 40% of the value of luck is added to your skills, okay? So it increases your skill points basically by a fraction. And it also reduces the chance of your lockpick or repair hammer breaking. By the way guys, if you found the video useful so far, please do consider subscribing as it really does help out. I really do want this channel to be more of a full-time channel than just like a part-time side channel. So, the more people who subscribe, the more videos I'm going to be making. Now let's talk about skills. So in Oblivion there is a few other skills that aren't in Skyrim. First being athletics, okay? So when you run instead of walk, your fatigue regen is reduced. But athletics mitigates this reduced regen rate until it is maxed out, and then it doesn't actually at all. It also reduces the amount of stamina that sprinting consumes now, because sprinting is a new mechanic in the game. The skill also increases faster when you're sprinting rather than you're running, so that's like the best way to upgrade this ability, and it also reduces the amount of fatigue you lose while sprinting. Armourer is purely the skill for repairing gear, not for making stuff like the smithing skill in Skyrim, unfortunately, unless you have some kind of mod installed. Now, Blade and Blunt are the two melee weapon skills. You don't have one-handed or two-handed in the game anymore. Look, the TLDR of whether you should use Blade or Blunt is Blade weapons faster but do slightly less damage than Blunt weapons, which are slower but do more damage per hit. It's that simple. And obviously, if you read the skill, they have varying different perk points at different skill levels that you may like or prefer. Now, in Oblivion, hand-to-hand is a separate skill for basically punching people and being a kung fu master, okay? And you also deal fatigue damage on top of health damage. You obviously don't do anywhere near as health damage as you would with a weapon, but the fatigue damage kind of makes up for it, although, to be honest, in Oblivion Remastered, it's not as powerful as it was in the original Oblivion, and this is because fatigue, it used to affect how much damage you deal, so you'd always want to maximize your fatigue, you know, while swinging a weapon or something, because then you'd get the maximum amount of damage every time. And then also, when an enemy's fatigue would get really low, they would start to stagger more and get knocked down, which, you know, made combat kind of fun because you could circle around the enemy and just, like, punch them to death. But now the stagger amount is much less, and it actually has been totally reworked to only happen when an enemy has fully depleted their fatigue, and it basically just means the enemies won't power attack as often. Mercantile is a separate skill purely for selling and buying stuff. The better it is, the better prices you get, and you unlock better items or merchants. Plus, you will eventually be able to invest in a shop, and they permanently have more gold to buy your items. And this is a good late game, as items often exceed the amount of gold that merchants actually have. Acrobatics is the ability to jump higher, and jumping will consume less and less fatigue the higher the skill is, and then you can eventually dodge and jump off the face of water. It is very good for archery kiting builds. Mysticism is a separate school of magic that they scrapped in Skyrim, which is really unfortunate because it has some really cool spells. It has stuff like Detect Life, where you can see enemies through walls, Dispel removes spell effects on yourself or targets, Reflect damage and Reflect spell damage. By the way, Reflect damage effect is only obtainable from 2 spells in the game. You can't make your own spell of this effect, and one of them is a birthsign power, so just something to bear in mind. Soul Trap, you absorb the souls of your enemies and basically put them into soul gems, and that regenerates your magical weapons and staffs. Sorry, staves, that was terrible grammar. Spell Absorption, you absorb spell damage, so you take less damage from spells, and then you regenerate your own based on the amount of damage absorbed. Telekinesis allows you to basically become a Jedi. You can move objects without touching them. It's only really useful for activating traps and stuff like that, and making items easy to steal if they are in vision of an NPC. Now, leveling has been totally reworked in Oblivion. It's very different compared to Skyrim, and it's also totally different compared to the original Oblivion. To level up, you increase your skills just like you did in Skyrim, but all skills help you get closer to your level up, whereas in Oblivion only your major skills used to. However, minor skills give 12.5% less XP points than your major skills. Attribute points are no longer based on the skills that you leveled up during your level up. You just get 12 virtue points now to distribute to a maximum of 5 in one attribute every level up, and then luck requires 4 virtue points per level. Also, skills themselves level up in much better ways now, so mercantile XP gain is determined by the price of items sold, obviously instead of the amount of items, how it used to be. Athletics has increased way faster and even faster from sprinting, and also magic school experience is now based on the power of the spell, so you can no longer cheese it by spamming really cheap spells. That no longer works to power level your magic, you actually have to use it properly. So these are all the important things that you need to know about combat. So fatigue no longer affects damage, just the ability to use power attacks. Power attacks have been buffed a lot and improved, and they're way more interesting now. They usually apply a weakness debuff to the target, like a bleed or some kind of damage increase, and actually a silence as well. Although technically that is a chance to happen on a normal hit for a blunt weapon. Trust me, the weapons are way more interesting in Oblivion Remastered. So the durability of your armor would obviously affects its effectiveness, but now the effectiveness is only significantly reduced when that item reaches 0 health, instead of it gradually decreasing over time like it did in Oblivion the original. Enemies are also way smarter in this game. They know how to use terrain, they use different kinds of attacks, they use the birthsign powers, they use loads of different kinds of magic and defensive maneuvers. These are honestly all of the major things that you need to know. The rest is really just explained by the game, or it's like really nitty gritty, you know, going over damage formulas and stuff like that. Long story short, combat is way better in Oblivion Remastered. It's way more refined and way more fun and a lot more interesting. Now, Disposition is a very important stat in the game that influences many interactions, but mainly NPCs. It's basically a score of how much people like you, and it's out of 100. Usually you need a disposition score of 60 to obtain important quest information to progress your quest. It is an immersive RPG feature. If you think about it, if we went around willy-nilly asking for information, realistically people would not automatically just tell you everything. You can increase disposition with the Persuasion minigame. It's a very simple minigame. There's 4 options of Persuasion: Admire, Joke, Coerce, and Boast. They will either like it a lot, like it, dislike it, or dislike it a lot. When you hover over the option, you will see their facial expression reflect what they like and dislike. You pick the biggest cheese wedge over what they like the most to get the biggest increase to disposition, and try to pick the smaller wedges over what they dislike, and so on and so forth. It's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. You can also use charm spells through the illusion tree to increase it. Disposition can also be increased by a speechcraft skill and personality attribute, but there's other things that affect it, like the race-to-race combo. Some races just have a default minus stat to certain races because they don't like that race for a lore reason, guild standing, and how famous you are, which leads me on to my next stat, the Fame and Infamy stat. This stat will increase the more quests you do. If you do good quests for good people, then the Fame stat increases. If you do bad quests like the Thieves Guild or the Dark Brotherhood, then your Infamy will increase. Either way, the higher stat that you have in Fame or Infamy, it will unlock more quests. And it will also affect how much people like you. When your Fame gets higher and higher, that starting disposition stat will increase, and also it will unlock greater power stones that you can find in the open world that require a certain Fame point, and it will change how people start to greet you. Disposition also affects how much you can haggle prices lower or higher from a vendor, along with your mercantile skill. You should always try to be haggling as much as you can. Usually when you start the game, you can at least haggle 60 to 70% unless your personality is really low, like you're playing an orc or something, but this also depends on the mercantile skill of the vendor. The higher their skill, the less you can haggle them, so it's always best to sell to vendors with a low skill, like novice mercantiles. That's literally a word I just invented because for some reason the word vendor didn't come to me. Now, alchemy might look complicated at first, but it really isn't. I'll admit that the new alchemy system is much worse than the old one, but it's not that bad. Every ingredient has 4 possible effects. The more you increase your skill, the more effects you unlock. You can mix 2 items of the same effect to make a potion, and this means you can also use more ingredients to create a potion with multiple effects. In-game, there is now a filter system intended to make it easier, but to be honest, it doesn't. You press the filter and it will show you all the ingredients with that effect, and there's now a positive and negative effect switcher. Also remember to deselect the filters and deselect the items when making new potions. That might be the reason why you think you can't make a potion when you can. So unlike Skyrim, you can actually create your own enchantments and spells and customize them a lot more in this game. There's a number of ways to unlock this. You will firstly likely obtain the ability of enchantment through a Sigil Stone, which are obtained from closing an Oblivion gate. A bonus tip here is if you save the game just after you've activated the Sigil Stone and just before it goes into your inventory, you can then open your inventory, check the effect, but then if it's not the effect you want, well, you can load the game, and every time you do this, the effect will actually change, so you can continuously just pick the one that you're aiming for, the one that you like. I'll leave a link in the description of every single Sigil Stone effect. They also increase in power as you increase in level, and they are actually the best and most powerful enchants that you can obtain. But obviously they are much less convenient than making them a enchanting altar. The other way is to buy the Mage Tallow candles after starting the DLC house questline for Frostcrag Spire. You can get them from the Mystic Emporium in a market district within the Imperial City for a base value of 2,000 gold, but they were likely not going to be that price, so remember to persuade and haggle the vendor to get that price lower. The other method is to join a Mages Guild, but obviously this takes much longer, because you have to get a recommendation from every single major town before you unlock access to the Arcane University. Enchanting is pretty simple. You have a soldier with a certain amount of power that will grant you increased stat bonuses or elemental damage or effect on a weapon. And it will also affect the amount of times the enchantment can be used before the weapon runs out and it has to be charged back up again with another soul gem. Grand Soul Gems and Black Soul Gems are the most powerful. Grand Soul Gems require high-leveled monsters, but Black Soul Gems require a humanoid, which are obviously easier to find, but they are harder to find, I guess, because they're usually on necromancers in high-level caves. You can also turn Grand Soul Gems into Black Soul Gems in the Dark Fissure. This will take quite a while to explain, so I am just going to leave a really good link in the description that explains how to do it. You will obviously need a soul trap spell or item to obtain the souls to charge up items. This can be a staff or it can be a weapon. You may also want to do the Azura Daedric questline to obtain a rechargeable soul gem, the Azura Star, like a Skyrim it is also in this game, and it doesn't get destroyed on use. When it comes to spell making, you can't just make any spell of any power and then just start using it. Created spells still do need a required skill, but you can always squeeze more power out of a created spell than a purchased one. Sometimes purchased spells have better mana efficiency, normally the ones that you get from quests, to be honest, so it's very rare. But anyway, if you keep adjusting the sliders to get it perfect, you can always normally just squeeze a little bit more power out of it. You can totally customize the spell to your heart's content, the amount of damage it's going to deal, or the amount of benefit it's going to give you, the duration, the area of effect, and whether it's going to affect yourself or a target, or whether it's going to be a projectile spell or on-touch spell. On-touch spells always consume less magic. I'd always recommend for melee magic builds to use on-touch spells because they're much more mana efficient. Now, I also want to just give a quick rundown on how sneak works in the game for people doing stealth builds. Okay, so the little eye when you are sneaking represents your detection. You are either hidden or gradually becoming discovered when the eye gets larger, until you are eventually obviously discovered, and it will tell you that you've been detected. Your detection is affected obviously mostly by your sneak skill, how fast you are moving, how lit up you are. For instance, if you have a torch or a starlight spell, that's not going to do you any favours. Neither is ambient lighting in the game. The weight of your shoes also affects it. It's very good to hotkey your boots when sneaking, especially when using heavy armour, because it obviously weighs more, to increase the ability of your sneaking. Just because you are using a heavy armour build, by the way, doesn't mean you can't do sneak as well. Actions like picking a lock or picking up items increase the chance of detection. Invisibility and chameleon spells decrease the chance of being seen. Invisibility is a total undetection. When you are invisible after casting that spell, nobody can attack you, okay, because no one knows where you are. But obviously actions cancel the effect, whereas chameleon is permanent, but without it being level 100, it won't give you full undetection, and you're going to need a lot of enchants to do that. The sound you make also affects it, along with certain mobs just being able to have better detection ability than others. So if you're whacking a sword at someone, you are much likely, doing it. When you're going for a sneak attack, you are more likely to be detected by nearby mobs because, you've set that mob off. Mobs also kind of like do a little bit of a aggro circle, I suppose, to call for help kind of thing. So you've obviously got to be careful about when you're going to use, pop out of shadows and do your sneak attacks. If you get detected, you will need to turn invisible or use a calm or command spell on the mob in order to totally reset your detection. But anyway guys, that is the beginner's guide to Oblivion. Hopefully I explained all the very complicated and advanced stuff about this game in a very short and sweet, concise and easy to explain manner. My name is Metagoblin. If you liked the video, please do subscribe, and remember, I'm not called a Metagoblin, actually I'm called a Night Goblin. I keep forgetting that on every single one of my video outros. Maybe in about a year's time I will eventually start remembering that this channel is called a Night Goblin. Anyway, ciao.